Reality Break is a new sci-fi ARPG inspired by games like Diablo 2. And you might be saying, wait a minute, there are spaceships. How can this be an ARPG? Where's my medieval fantasy? Where are the demons? Is there even a Diablo? There are no demons, and no, there's no Diablo, at least as far as I can find. But this is absolutely an ARPG. First of all, you kill enemies and they explode into loot. Oh, that's not good enough for you? Well, there's a dodge roll. Most ARPGs have dodge rolls. Still not convinced? You spend the entire early game trying to avoid enemies that explode on death, and by that I mean they explode, and if they do, you die if you stand in it. By the late game, you are zooming across the screen at several 100,000 miles per second, exploding literally everything into more piles of loot, and only stopping when you need to pick up something shiny. So yes, this is absolutely an ARPG. Very recently, the dev reached out, sent me a key. I've been having a blast, so I decided to make a video on it. And if you want to see my thoughts on more ARPGs and more indie games, then do be sure to get subscribed, ring the notification bell, and maybe leave a like while you're down there. For now, let's get into things, starting with some of my thoughts on the early game, then moving on to gameplay systems, then of course moving on to my thoughts on the endgame loop before wrapping everything up with a verdict. Reality Break blends the single-player ARPG experience with the replayability of roguelikes. So, the game plays out through cycles. Not only does this refer to the story, new events being unlocked after each successful cycle, but also to some of the game's mechanical systems, where you lose all your loot and have to build your ship back up, starting from scratch or maybe from a little bit of a point of help. This is really cool because it very much captures that fresh ARPG restart feeling without you having to wait 3 months for there to be a new league or season. The game's other main mechanic is the fate system, where you are able to rewrite and alter reality. Now, in terms of the story, this is mostly a gimmick, where you can rewrite things, but you don't have a choice. It's just, if you don't rewrite fate, then you're going to lose the game here, so to continue the cycle, you rewrite fate. But when it comes to your equipment, the fate system is very, very cool. You can use it to enhance certain stats on items. You can also use it to completely transform items, making something that is formerly too large for your ship because it's meant for a warship perfectly equipable. Or you can reroll affixes entirely, replacing them with fun new stuff. All of this comes from an ancient artifact you acquire in one of the very first missions. You can think of this as a MacGuffin full of space magic that makes the impossible possible, and also, you absolutely shouldn't trust because it could just be a voice in your head. In the early game, I found enemies to be pretty tough. Nothing was likely to kill me instantly, but if I didn't pay attention, I'd take quite a lot of damage, and while you do have a heal, the cooldown is fairly long. In part, this is because you start with just a primary weapon and very limited equipment. But as you get a few things, a targeting computer, some shields, maybe afterburners to go fast, or another movement skill to dodge enemies entirely, and a secondary weapon that tends to do more damage, but consumes energy, the game certainly opened up a lot. I wouldn't say there's much in the way of buildcraft here. Instead, it feels more to me like I'm equipping my ship with different parts, and there are certain guns that are more effective, or certain guns that I like. There are certain guns that are perfectly effective, but I don't like them as much, so I don't tend to use them very often, which does make my runs feel a little bit more samey than both with other ARPGs and other roguelikes. However, in your first few cycles, the game does an excellent job with the early gearing process, where after almost every kill, you're looking at what did it drop? Oh, it's just a white junk item, but maybe I don't have that equipment slot. You are scrounging for scraps, and it feels great. And before you know it, you're going to be taking on elites, more powerful ships, and even some boss fights that have some pretty clear telegraphs. There aren't too many different boss fights, but each of them have unique mechanics, and they're pretty darn fun. But as you continue going on to your second or third cycles, you start to care a little bit less about just finding anything off the ground, and more about the stats items have. For example, items with the power stat will vastly amplify your damage, whereas items with the structure stat increase your health. In short, you want to combine things like structure and shields to make sure you're tanky enough that you don't just get blown up out of nowhere, while stacking power, haste, crit chance, and crit damage to make sure that you're blowing up the enemies before they blow you up. As you find ever rarer items, you'll also start encountering signature items. These are either epic or artifact level, They're very, very shiny, Epic being purple, Artifact being red, and they have unique stats, doing crazy things like making it so that you can just infinitely dodge, or that you get super recharging shields. Some of these are absolutely game-breaking, and it feels very much like equipping a really good unique item in Path of Exile, or an uber unique in Diablo and just going, haha, I'm too good for the game now. And then you raise the difficulty and all of a sudden everything is destroying you again. Now after each cycle, you get a certain number of reality points. These are based on various things such as what level your pilot is, how many missions you completed, how many optional bonus objectives or challenge objectives you completed, and how long you survived in the Chaos Realm before the cycle came to a close. At first, you are given access to one skill tree, but as you fill it out, you'll get more options with your skill tree having skill trees, and then you'll get both Tier 2 and Tier 3 trees. In some cases, these unlock gameplay features allowing you to progress further. In other cases, these unlock bonuses, such as the ability for rarer and more powerful items to drop, reduced costs so you can alter reality pretty much to your heart's content with no consequences, or static bonuses that help you progress even faster. This means each time you enter a new cycle, you're going to progress more quickly than the last. You're going to get stronger relative to your enemies. At the very least until you raise the difficulty, because yes, one of the things you can unlock is difficulties. You'll start by default on difficulty 1, and you can go all the way up to difficulty 10. Higher difficulties mean the enemies are way scarier, but in exchange you get better loot. Now, I'm not going to get into too many details of the campaign story, but it starts relatively simple. You're the space mercenary, sent on a job, and you gotta retrieve the artifact. Then things get significantly more complicated. Before you know it, you're traveling through time to achieve your goals, and by the way, yes, you do need to achieve 88 miles per second to get back to the future to make sure all this happens. And overall, I like the story. At the very least enough that I paid attention to it every time I encountered something new. Not enough that I paid attention to it on subsequent missions, because after a while it did get repetitive, but that does make sense when I've done it 5 or 6 times. However, in terms of a story, I do have one small disappointment. The reality-altering mechanic here really felt more like a gimmick, because you're only able to use it to progress forwards in a linear manner. You're told, this is impossible, so you rewrite reality to say, no, actually this is possible. You don't need any fate points for this, so it's not like you can screw yourself out of options by using all the points. And when the main core of your story is rewriting reality, I really would have preferred something that gave me a few options. Even if it was just like, hey, this is the easy path, this is the medium path, this is the hard path, just something to make me feel like I was actually rewriting reality, as opposed to going through dialogue options that unlocked when I reached a certain point in my progression. That said, if you're someone who doesn't really enjoy reading dialogue, you can absolutely play the game for its gameplay and ignore the story entirely. Early on, you feel pretty weak, but it feels awesome as you're able to experiment with more weapons. You go from, oh god, that enemy could kill me, to, haha, I am super tanky, but I do no damage because I didn't pay attention to my offense, to, oh my god, this is awesome, I just fly through enemies and they explode, I move at 1,000,000 miles per second, my entire screen is just pixels because I have super fast firing weapons, I'm spamming so many projectiles I can hold down left click and right click because I have infinite energy. It's the whole ARPG endgame build feeling, where you have certainly overpowered everything in the game, and at that point you are just farming loot to make the numbers go up, because it's not really about if you need more DPS to kill or overkill the enemies, it's about the fact that you need more DPS because the game tells you your DPS, so you need that number to go up. But how do you do that? Well, let's take a look at some of the game's systems. Alrighty, time to talk about game systems. So first up, your basic attack, or your left click by default, is your primary weapon. In general, the primary weapon does less damage, but it costs you nothing, so you can use it infinitely. On the other hand, your secondary weapon, which in this case is a launcher, or if I swap my loadouts, is a Nova, does more damage. However, this comes at the cost of spending energy. Energy is a resource that your ship uses for various functions. You have a limited amount of it, though your generator can give you a lot of energy regen to the point where it doesn't really become an issue. Now, in addition, if you take some damage, you can use the health regeneration skill. This heals you, and also cannot be used at full health, so I can't demonstrate it here. Last up, you have your propulsion ability, which currently is Impulse Dodge. And you'll notice that right now, it doesn't really have a cooldown. That isn't normal. That is because I have a very powerful ability that more or less gives me infinite impulse dodges. Which you can see right here, the Syndicate Coiler, an epic igniter, reduces the cooldown of Impulse Dodge by 88%, effectively meaning it doesn't have a cooldown. Pretty fun to just dash all over the place. Now, in my opinion, the coolest part of a game is the rewrite system. You get all sorts of different items, and the interesting ones have this little electricity symbol. This means you can rewrite a property of the item. So on this black market mechanism, the affix value for health on hit can be rewritten, increasing it all the way up to 3.8, which you can see by the fact there's that little lightning bolt next to the mod. On the other hand, this twin core is a craftable item, where you can extract fragments from a different item and put them on something. So let's do that real quick to demonstrate. So right here, this unlocks as you progress the story. If you don't have the Syndicate Scientist near Station 6, don't worry, you simply haven't progressed far enough. And at first, you'll have to use these chassis. But later on, as you unlock more Reality Break talents, you're able to craft directly on gear that drops. So I extracted a 39% Swarmer weapon damage. It uses 6 crafting potential, and I'm just going to drag it over here as an example. There we go. Now you can get rid of it, but realistically doesn't matter too much. Gonna create here, and now the item is finished, or at the very least, crafted. In general, I would recommend using all of the crafting potential before you finish an item rather than what I did here. This was just a quick little demonstration. And hey, crafted items, they look pretty cool. And next up, on this galaxy mechanism, you can both increase the affix value, so up to 52% loot quality, or you can reroll the total health multiplier. It can either become 4%, a twin bolt affix, which is a very special affix unlocked by later tier talents that's super powerful, the draw essence drain increase, or the fortify recharge. I'm just going to take twin bolt because it's cool. And there you go, +2 to twin bolt, which gives your attacks a chance to divide into 2. Now, another really cool application of this system is equipping items that normally would be unequipable. This salvaged Quantum Heart, for example, is an epic Quantum Heart generator salvaged from a capital class ship, which does not fit on the Stiletto that is a fighter. So what you can do is rewrite the size first to warship and then to fighter. And all of a sudden, now it's an equipable item, which is why I have one equipped. And in this case, you can also scale the unique mod value, so you gain significantly more energy every time your health is damaged. All the way up to 4.61 in the case of this item. There's always a little bit of randomness here. Now, when it comes to rewrites, my personal favorite is rewriting rarity. So right here, the rarity rewrite path is available for this potent ricochet of preservation. So it goes from an uncommon to a rare. As you'll notice, the stats start to get better as the rarity increases. You can go from rare to epic, where it becomes the shrapnel. In Reality Break, each epic item has its own signature ability. In this case, the shrapnel has a chance to spawn 2 additional projectiles on the point of impact, making it really good for clear. And hey, it's craftable. So at this point, all you do is put in some fragments and you're good to go. Now, another character progression system that honestly I don't use as much as I should is the Station 6 analysis. This adds a discovery affix to your item. As you can see here, the 3% elite damage is a discovery affix. And the reason I forget is because it takes about 27 minutes of real life time. Now over here, the tech specialist gives you an upgrade. For example, the drone slot, which allows you to equip an entirely new item. Speaking of power within a cycle, there's also the codex. This unlocks as you are able to increase the rarity of your fate core. Think of this as a catch-up mechanic / permanent power increase regardless of your gear. So for example, if I complete the alloyed armament set by picking up these items at any rarity, I will gain a bonus to critical hit chance. And the higher rarity the items, the higher that bonus. Right now I have the epic level version, so I get plus 20% crit chance. Whereas on the Arsenal of the Syndicate, because I found the Subversion Lure, which is an artifact item, I have plus 1000% loot quality, which helps me get, you guessed it, more artifact items. Which, by the way, Subversion Lure, pretty darn cool item. You drain all nearby enemy shields, thus massively increasing your damage against enemies. And yes, I know it has craftable stuff, and I haven't used it because I haven't gotten the perfect fragments, because I'm really trying to push this ship, mostly just for the fun of it. I want to see how big the damage output can get. Now, in addition to all the gear-based systems, you also have your pilot skills. These are a mix of active skills on the left, 4 of which can be used at any given time, and passive skills. You pick from one of 2 options for each tier, and these are always active. So for my first tier, Alter Spacetime or Confine. Confine slows enemies, Alter Spacetime makes you go faster. And yes, you do get to rewrite fate to alter these as well, though that's a system that unlocks later. It won't be available to you immediately. And hey, you can even increase the level, so now the Alter Spacetime is way better. On the other hand, the passive is Energon. Increased damage dealt with primary weapons. Now ultimately, which skills you choose are up to you. There are some that I personally like above others. For example, I really like Negate Existence. Not only does this do considerable damage in a fairly good area, but it does 10 times the damage in execute range, which, especially before you are one-shotting things, is really handy for taking out bosses, capital ships, and other tanky enemies. I also really like Omniscience after getting the pilot to level 15, where loot quality is increased based on potential RP. Potential RP are the number of reality points that you get after you reality break and go into a new cycle. So right now on this cycle, I would get 6,752 reality points, meaning I get 6,752% loot quality, so I get way more epic and artifact items, aka the shiny purple and red things that you want to see. I also quite like Fateful Infusion. Activate to increase the damage of your primary weapon by, at this point, 250%, but it consumes a little energy. Now last up, as you go through multiple cycles, you gain reality points, which are used in the reality stream menu to unlock different talents. The first one you will always want to unlock is Stabilize Fate Core, because this allows you to progress the story. But many of the other talents that you unlock have bonuses which you can use to progress, or are simply cool. For example, Subatomic Fortification increases your ship health, making you much more tanky in the early game. Whereas Omen allows you to change the difficulty, making enemies much harder, but also much more rewarding. If you spend enough points in Tier 1, you unlock Tier 2. Initially when you unlock these, they will be much simpler, you'll only see the big points. After you spend enough points here, the little points also unlock, allowing for further investment. Eventually you will get to Tier 3. And this is where stuff gets really crazy. There's a whole bunch of game-breaking things, like Secret Findings, where stations can just stock epic items. And also, you can boost unique modifiers on epic items, making them way stronger. Also, this is how you unlock scaling for the Codex sets. So instead of just completing each set for a static bonus, now you get a bonus based on rarity. And this is where you can start crafting on items as a rewrite path, which is really fun because it adds so much depth to the gearing. At first I thought the gearing was good, was absolutely one of the game's high points, but that the crafting system was a bit too simplistic since you could only assemble things from shells. And then I discovered diversified assembly, and I am actually super happy with the crafting system ever since I unlocked this talent. So, how do you get all this cool gear? Well, as you're completing story missions and progressing, a good amount of gear is going to drop. But since you get reset at the start of each cycle, you're only going to get so geared if you're just sticking to the story stuff, which is where open farming of side missions comes in. These have a variety of rarities and even some special properties. Though the special properties are unlocked later, they won't be here when you initially encounter them. So in this case, it's a common salvage mission where you can obtain propulsion. This mission, which gives a stabilizers item, is affected by a Fate Storm. A Fate Storm is something you unlock for getting your Fate Core to Epic, that basically means a whole bunch of monsters spawn in. There's also the mission flow system up here at the top. Each time you complete a mission, you get a mission flow bonus. After you complete 5, you get a special bonus with a big old loot multiplier. So completing this, mission targets take double damage. Completing this, loot quantity multipliers increased by 100%. Over here, the survival mission, elite tier ships take triple damage. Here, siphon energy is increased by 1, and the same thing here. So just for example, let's do this salvage mission, and I'm going to talk through a few of the things as I go. Immediately, there's some enemies to fight, and since this is a salvage mission, the goal really is just to kill enemies until you get the requisite item. Might take a little bit, might even take some searching. So for now, let's kill some enemies. Actually recently equipped a new secondary weapon, so I should try that out. Look, fun little item. That orange exclamation mark, that's the mission target. This guy is going to drop a propulsion item, so let's blow him up here. Surging Impeller of Specialization. There you go. That's how you complete the mission. This is also a good time to talk about the character super ability, which is why the edge of my screen has gone all fuzzy. It is a fun giant laser. Unfortunately, while I do really like the big giant laser ability, I haven't found it to be super practical in the late game because, unfortunately, there's a point at which the character just naturally outscales the super laser. Now, when it comes to endgame farming, there's one other mechanic that I want to talk about because it's really fun, and that is the Fate Storm. During a Fate Storm, a whole bunch of enemies will just constantly warp into your location. As you can see right now, a bunch of elites are spawning. And yes, I did just crash into one, and yes, my ship did take damage because your ship is a physical object and there's collision, which is really cool. Basically, you have to survive the onslaught or farm the onslaught for 2 minutes, and you're going to get a whole bunch of loot if you do. The items are already piling up. I wouldn't be surprised if I see an epic item or two, though for the most part, it's a whole bunch of rares. The faster you kill, the faster stuff's going to spawn in. This very much rewards you for having a good build, and things get a little bit crazy. Also, you get so many sparks. Oh look, there's the epic item that I talked about. All right, about 5 seconds left here. One slightly unfortunate thing about Fate Storms is they do not warp in capital or warship class, so you only get the little guys. And here we go, whole bunch of extra loot. That's a Fate Storm. It's pretty fun, it's super chaotic, and it's something that sets the endgame apart from the rest of the earlier game mission experience. Basically, a Fate Storm is a bunch of enemies for people who like fighting a bunch of enemies in their ARPGs. So what's the verdict? Should you play Reality Break? Well, first let's recap a little bit. The campaign and story do a good job of drawing you in. And because the story advances through different cycles, with each having a hard endpoint after which you unlock a little bit more and a little bit more, it does a great job of onboarding new players without overwhelming them. There are a lot of systems and interactions between systems in the endgame, doing things like rewriting affixes, shrinking an item down, and then crafting on top. That's a lot for a new player to handle. So I think it's great that that unlocks gradually over the course of several cycles, rather than being dumped on you in a 30-minute tutorial at the start. This is a good thing, and it makes the game really easy to get into. Combat is also very good. Not only is your ship responsive, but I like that it's a physical object. Early on, you do not want to collide with things. If you crash into an asteroid or an enemy ship, you're going to take significant damage. Late game, you can get so tanky that you can make crashing into things a build, which is really fun. It captures the ARPG power fantasy. Early game, you are weak. You must outplay your enemies, dodge their projectiles. Late game, you can outbuild them and outscale them. You no longer care about dodging the boss because you're just going to slam right into him at ramming speed and obliterate him in an instant. Similarly, the gameplay loop is good. The Reality Break system gives you reasons to complete additional challenge missions, and it also encourages you to go into the next loop rather than just sitting there farming and perfecting your gear until you've gone pretty darn far into the story. Because it's really fun to start weak, get strong, and then be super fast. You go from taking 4 or so minutes to complete a mission to taking 30 seconds to complete a mission. Plus, as you interact with more systems and as you master more systems, you're able to become stronger faster. You figure out, oh, this is OP, I can use this every time. Or, that isn't so good, I'm just going to avoid that. I think this is a really good way to blend roguelike and ARPG, because usually what I see is an ARPG game that makes a roguelike mode, and that never quite feels right because you're still using your regular ARPG build and you're interacting with ARPG systems. Instead, this feels more like the roguelike was the gameplay base, and then the ARPG systems were adapted to fit that model, which feels really fun because you get the same loot chase, but unlike a live service game where you only get a restart every 3 or so months, you can restart whenever you want. And speaking of, the loot is great. This is absolutely the best part of Reality Break. The early looting experience, you are scrounging for scraps. Literally anything that you can equip is going to go on your ship. But then you become more discerning. You look for things with good fate affixes and you can rewrite stuff. Later on, you get more powerful affixes, you get more powerful rewrite options, and you get the crafting, which works really well. For a game like this, I think there always needs to be some level of randomness in crafting. If it is completely deterministic, that gets boring very quickly. But if it is too deterministic, especially in a single-player experience, it's going to be so random that it's not worth engaging with. Reality Break does a good job of finding the middle ground here, where the item acquisition portion of crafting is random. You need items to drop with the affixes you want, then you need to shatter those affixes off. But once you do that, putting them on the item that you're actually going to use is 100% guaranteed. You will not be screwed over by RNG, so it's a matter of collecting things, then crafting the perfect gun. On the other hand, activities, especially in the endgame farming loop, were a little bit disappointing to me, so I'd say this is an area that needs a bit of improvement. After you get familiar with the side missions, they become repetitive. And worse yet, at least for me, the Fate Storm throws so many enemies at you that it almost feels better to jump from Fate Storm to Fate Storm to Fate Storm, unless you specifically need an item that drops from a warship or capital ship, and ignore the missions entirely. Yes, the flux bonuses are pretty cool, and that's sort of worth it, but also it's really fun to spend 2 minutes killing enemies and then get a whole big pile of loot. In comparison, it makes the base missions feel kind of unrewarding. This probably isn't helped by the fact that there's only a few of them, and a couple are much slower, such as exploring the derelict or scanning for data, missions that don't feel like they're worth it when I could complete 3 or 4 of the other mission types in the time it takes me to do one of those. That said, while this is a low point of a game for me personally, I don't think it's going to be a big issue for most players, because this is not meant to be some forever live service where you're grinding for hundreds and thousands of hours. And as you're progressing through the story, that part of the game is far more engaging, and it keeps you in the loop so that you go again and go again without worrying too much about farming hundreds of side missions. So if you're a fan of loot-based Diablo-like ARPGs, I can absolutely recommend Reality Break, and I think it's a really good game. I'm especially impressed with the fact that it blends the roguelike and ARPG elements so well, in a way that feels far more ARPG than most ARPG roguelike modes. Also, this is a project from a solo dev, and to me personally, it's always super impressive when someone just goes ahead and makes a game. It's kind of like magic. So, Reality Break is coming out on February 10th, 2025. It's going to be available on major platforms like Steam, so next time you're in between leagues, want a break from that live service grind, be sure to check out Reality Break, as it's a pretty darn good time. So far, I've had quite a bit of fun with the 20 hours I've put into the game, and I can see myself putting in up to 20 more to really push the limits and unlock some crazy items, like what other artifacts exist. So far, I've only found 2, and I definitely want to know about more. Again, a big thanks to Courtney from Element Games for reaching out and providing me with a key. It was a blast to check this out. Again, if you want to see my thoughts on other ARPGs, do be sure to get subscribed. And if you're looking for something else to watch after this, maybe check out my thoughts on either Wayfinder or Ghostlord, 2 other small indie ARPGs that I absolutely fell in love with. Those will be up in the card and down below. For now, thank you very much for watching to the end. I'm glad you've enjoyed. If you pick up Reality Break, may all of your reality rewrites be favorable, and I'll see you in the next one.